Okay, so here's the next sled. This is the 800. So the first sled, 600, that's a 2014 Renegade Adrenaline. This is a 2012 GXS SE 800. The difference between the two are the chassis. The Renegade's an XS chassis. This is an XR chassis. The Renegade has an R-motion skid, rear skid. This has an SC-5 rear skid. So let's turn this around and take a look. And here's your difference. Where the R-motion, had that aluminum block, and then this wheel here was down here. So it goes straight across, so bolt right in that top part there. Focus camera. That top part all the way across to the other wheel. So also, you notice it's not a bolt, it is an Allen wrench. The size of that Allen wrench is 10 millimeters. Okay. I don't know if this, I know this screws into an axle that's inside in here. It's like an axle within an axle, or an axle within a pipe. Now on the MXZ, this model here, this is a 2001, very similar setup, that you can get this side undone, but you won't be able to get the other side undone because that axle within inside the pipe will spin. So if it's like this, the trick is you break the Loctite on one side and then put this tight again. Then you go to the opposite end and do the same thing, but we'll figure that out as we go along. So as I was looking at the sled, I found some damage, so we're going to be not going to show how to repair this, but I got a few wheels here that took a shot, so we got to replace some wheels. So I'm actually going to put this in time-lapse mode and start working it. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, I still did the strap around the track to hold it up there. So when I lift this up, I still have to take track tension off. I still have to put a mark here so I know how far these tension screws go in. I use the paint marker, but I still do this because it'll allow me to work with this wheel and stuff without this falling down and having weight on it. So I still have the sled supported up to ceiling hooks. My hooks are screwed into the ceiling joists, so they're strong enough to hold this. All right, let's put this in a time lapse while I work on dropping this suspension. So I was correct. You have to loosen one side here first. This is that axle. It goes through the center of this tube and to the other side. So when you get this loose, you got to put your bolt back in again. You don't have to crank it, just do it snug, kind of tight, and then take your pneumatic gun and zip the other side over there all the way out. This side, since you already broke the Loctite, this should be able to zip right out as well and drop the suspension. The other thing I want you to take notice is in the R motion, you have a down tube right here as part of the suspension. Come on, camera. You have a down tube that goes from here and it holds your adjustment blocks here. Here, you notice there isn't any here. So your springs still go in the same way as the other one, but just take notice of the difference right there between the two. So let's continue taking the idler wheels off now. I don't think this has to come off because my springs aren't behind it. They're on their own separate shaft here and here. So we're going to do this a little different because there's a tension here. So we're going to start from up here. We're going to disconnect the slide. I don't know if my finger can show it. We're going to disconnect this slide. And I'm hoping that'll take tension off the upper part of the spring. I can't get at the back side of this bolt, so I have to take these idler wheels off, which is no big deal because one I got to replace anyway. So that's a wheel that hit a rock. Depending what you have for Allen wrenches, a regular right angle will fit in here between the wheel and here. A straight one if you have the round type head, will fit in there, but it's tight. This wheel is actually in the way, but I'm gonna see if I can do it without taking the wheel off. I'm feeling the other side to see if the bolt is turning. You know, if it's a straight axle like up here. But at the moment it doesn't feel like it. I'm going to go to the other side and get that off. So my assumption is correct. This axle here goes straight through to the other side. So as I'm trying to take this bolt off, this whole thing is spinning. You can see there's these holes here. Let's see, here we go. See the hole there? It's also on the other side. I have a tool. It's actually a ground down screwdriver that has a point, but it's small enough to stick in there, and I think I can stop this from spinning, but I'm going to do it on the other side. Got them to break loose. This is what I had, and I'll show you how I use this. So now we're going to lift the springs and push the whole axle up this way. That's the space I was talking about. So what I did is I pushed the tool in here, then I turned it up. Because as this spun, it spun up against the springs. And so the springs stopped it, with this being here, from spinning. Before I put the new springs back in, I'm going to take this out. Got good grease. This is what I want to see. But what I want is these wheels that go at the end weren't greased in. So I just want to be sure this is cleaned off and get the other one off. I see there's a plastic spacer here, which means there's a plastic spacer on the tube on the other side. I want to show this. See this line here? That's the bearing inside the wheel. And it started to corrode on there. Here's the other side. So we're going to clean that off. So when we put these wheels back in, we're going to put grease inside here. There's no grease inside these wheels. So clean the whole shaft, remove the grease. It had a smell to it, so we're going to put all new grease on there. Again, I'm going to stick to my waterproof grease. Now the sequence of putting the shaft back in is you'll have this plastic spacer on there, and there's actually a lip on this drive shaft on both sides here. It's a step down. So this plastic sleeve slides on, and it'll actually stop at this lip. Then there's a washer that goes on, and then your wheel goes on. Sorry, I think I'm in the camera here. Washer goes on, and your wheel goes on. And then on the other side, outside is that spacer, plastic spacer. So let's get this reassembled. Why don't you take a look at this? This is where your drive shaft goes to hold the ride height springs, the torsion springs. With the wheel on, you can see it covers the bolt that goes in there to hold it. With the wheel off, I have access to it right here. So the question is, or the answer is, when you're changing out the springs, do you want to drop it from the frame? Okay, so you can have easy access to this. Technically, you could have it still attached to the frame and you still have access to this, but you can't really get much torque on it when you reassemble it. That's the problem. So I'm going to leave the wheels off so I can install this first so I can get torque on that. When I reassemble stuff, I look for any worn out parts or rust and all. And if you look at these carefully on a surface here, you can see this hole has been enlarged. It almost looks like a step down. It should not look like that. It should be a perfectly square hole. So I bought 2 of these. The other one is on order. I'll maybe see it next week. These go for $10 each. Give you an idea of price. Here are your part numbers, or your part number for the 800. So this is the left-hand spring. And this is your right-hand spring. So while recording this video, there was one thing I noticed, but I didn't notice at the time. It's because I have a pneumatic shock absorber, or air shock absorber, the GXS, that's what it has, just like the Skidoo Enduro. One thing you have to be aware of is the hose connection, the air hose connection. And let me show you that. And that's the hose right there. This here. So as your suspension hangs, you're going to have stress on this corner. Be wary of that. I had my track and suspension very close to the floor, and I didn't have the weight hanging down on it because I still have my track strapped up. So there was no stress on this hose. So I wanted to make that aware to anyone who's working on this model sled with that shock, or with this suspension that's built in. See how I have them together? You know what? I'm surprised there's no washer here. Nothing to do with dispersing weight, but or even a lock washer. I know you have to put Loctite in this. I'm always thinking, I'm trying to think ahead here in regards to, you know, future repairs. They do a lock washer. Think. Everything else has washers, except for this. Rear wheels have washers. This has washers. Center wheels have washers. But this doesn't. And then the other thing to think about is the length of this going inside in regards to support. You know, if you put a washer on, how many threads do you lose by doing that? Now the center axle does not spin once these are in. It's one solid piece, and so the spring really just slides around it. I think I'm going to do a lock washer on here. Even though I'm going to do Loctite, I'm going to do a lock washer just as a backup. Let me get a lock washer. So these are grade 8 lock washers. Fit on perfect. So on the other side, I stuck in a just a poker, like if you're gonna punch a hole through something like that with a sharp tip, to hold the axle in place. As I take this back out, this assembly won't fall down. This is high strength Loctite, if you could see it. Now the same for the other side. So I guess next, I'm going to install this up to the frame. I'll get this piece in.
You still need me?
No, I'm all set, thank you. So wheel, plastic spacer. Bolt that goes in has a washer with it. Now remember, this bolt here as it screws into the axle here, it will turn the axle on the other side. So I have my hand on the other bolt to see if it's turning as I'm tightening this up. And it's not, it's going in. The reason why I'm not using a pneumatic to put it all back together, I don't want to risk cross-threading the bolt into the axle. On both axles, this one here and the leaf spring one, there's a spacing of about maybe a 1/16 of an inch in where there's no thread, so it gives you an opportunity to line up the bolt. But it's best to do it by hand because you can feel if you got it threaded correctly or not. I want you to see the tool I'm using here. This is a 3/8 ratchet with a flexible head. It's cobalt. Length of this I think is 18 inches long. Reason I'm using such a long one is I get better leverage and I can torque it down a lot easier with this. So the other side is tight, so we're going to do this side. Now, more than likely there are torque settings for this, but I do it to where I feel it's really tight. I don't want to go super tight because the drive shaft is aluminum. This too, where the leaf springs or the ride height springs, that's also aluminum. So I don't want to go super tight because you can easily strip those threads. So that's in. This was all dirty. So you see I cleaned that all out. So this goes against inside of here. What do I got here? 6mm Allen wrench tip. This separates. So we're just going to do a little grease here, top part of the bolt. That's it. Drop it in. Mush it around. And do some grease. Even though it's in plastic, still the grease helps protect the metal. All right. The bar, as it slides in, or the torsion spring as it slides in, always goes onto the top. Put that in. And then the fun part. Slide this on. Yeah. This is a nylock nut, which means it has the plastic insert. So I don't need any Loctite on there. All right. One spring is in. So we'll come back and do the other side. So let's take a look here. So technically you could remove this if you want without dropping the axle. I just find using a very short L-angle wrench doesn't give you enough leverage to really torque that down, and if I come up you can see it's partially hidden by the wheel. So doing it the way I did is better to get it tight. This was a little easy to get reconnected compared to the 600 only because, well, look at my track and I have no rear wheels, so that made it easier. I got to order new wheels for the rear because that demolished, and the one in here also completely fell apart. So that's one in, and then the other one will be the same thing. So I learned a few things on this one. One, don't assume the size of the spring, bigger spring goes with the bigger sled. Apparently not. 3 trips later, I got the springs issue solved. It was my fault. It wasn't the deal that I worked with fault. I made it a poor assumption that the bigger spring would go with the 800 and the smaller spring would go with the 600. Well, totally wrong on that one. This 800 takes a much smaller spring, and I think why is because I have the air suspension on this sled, so the 600 does not, and I think that's the main reason why the 800 has such a small spring. My guess is if you looked at maybe a Renegade for this same year, well, it would be a different chassis. I think I'm just making an assumption here, but I think any XR chassis with an 800 E-Tec in it without the air suspension, it's going to have a bigger spring. That air suspension on here is huge. It's a huge spring. Main reason why I changed these on both sleds is with my gear on, I'm probably weighing in around 325, 330. I'm a heavy person, unfortunately, and so I was putting the springs, I was using the springs beyond their capabilities in regards to tension. So both sleds had to be updated because one sled will carry 2 people sometimes, 1 person sometimes. My 800, well, it'll just carry 1 person, me. But I found that I was riding my air shock at level 4 on bumpy days, really bumpy days, and there's only 5 settings on the shock, so I was close to maxing out on riding this. So that was kind of a red flag saying I need beefier springs. So I apologize up front if this video is a little confusing, but it also gives you an idea of what's involved in getting this done. It's not something you can just knock off very quickly. There's a lot of muscling around. and especially when you're doing this on the floor versus say if you have a sled lift. My sled lift was those straps. And that's it. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Rifle your comments down below in the comments section. I will leave the part numbers in the detailed section. The parts, the spring part numbers, you will not find easily online. They're actually quite difficult. You will for the 600 Renegade chassis, but you will not for the XR chassis. I think those springs are probably from a 2-up sled. It's not listed as a heavy duty spring, because when I ran the numbers I wasn't able to find it as a heavy duty spring, but I'm trusting the dealer on this one. So this is Big Guy DIY signing off. Have a good sled season. Hopefully I don't have to do any more repairs this season. The date is January 2nd. Happy New Year to everyone out there. We had snow up north and it all melted because of rain. This is going to be a very short sled season. Take care.